Good morning, y'all. Welcome to Chapter 9. Searching for the Shoshone, mid-July through August 31st, 1805. Seaman splashed into the cold, clear water to escape the suffocating summer heat. He plunged his head under the river surface to rid his eyes from the pesky gnats, but as soon as he scrambled out of the water, the sun beat down on his back again and the gnats swarmed all over his face. The Missouri River no longer resembled its nickname, Old Muddy. Now it was a swift mountain stream tumbling over rocks and rushing around cliffs. As the men fought against the current, sweat slid down their necks. Sometimes the current was so strong they couldn't paddle or pull against it, so they had to pull the canoes with ropes for hours. All the while the sun baked on their shoulders and the chilly water numbed their legs. Mosquitoes buzzed around their eyes. As the explorers followed the river toward its source, they were heading south. To their right, the Rocky Mountains stood like a wall between them and the western sea. The men shuddered when they looked at the pointed peaks, which seemed to pierce the very heavens. Unlike the tree-covered rounded slopes of the Alpine range, the Rockies were jagged and steep, with snowy tops. Secretly, each man wondered whether the expedition would be able to cross such rugged mountains. The captains had already made a plan for the crossing. They knew that the Shoshone Indians, Sacagawea's people, lived on the eastern side of the Rockies. The Shoshones had plenty of horses. With Sacagawea's help as a translator, Lewis and Clark planned to trade for enough horses to carry the expedition's supplies. The captains hoped the Shoshones might be willing to supply an Indian guide to show them the way through the steep mountains. On July 19th, Captain Lewis led the expedition up the river while Captain Clark took a small party of men overland to search for the Shoshones. On the river, the canoes entered a canyon where the rocky walls rose more than 1,000 feet. The water was too deep for the men to stand in. They crossed through the dark shadows cast by towering cliffs. The place was so remarkable that Lewis struggled for words to describe it. He finally named it the Gates of the Rocky Mountains. As the canoes emerged from the canyons, Seaman woofed. His keen nose had picked up the smell of smoke. He rushed from one end of the canoe to the other, tensed for danger. The dugout canoe rocked with his movements. Lewis stood and scanned the sky, and he spotted a thick column of smoke about 7 miles away. A large area of the prairie seemed to be burning. Lewis groaned. "What's wrong, Captain?" said George Shannon. "The fire must have been deliberately set," Lewis said. "You think Captain Clark is signaling to us?" Lewis shook his head sadly. "I doubt it. Clark wouldn't have set the prairie on fire." "So Indians must have set the fire," Shannon said cheerfully. Sorry, I should reread that if you said it cheerfully. So Indians must have set the fire?" Shannon said cheerfully. "Guess we'll be meeting up with a band of Shoshones today or tomorrow." Lewis's face was grim. His eyes met Sacagawea's, and she nodded sadly, confirming her suspicions. "It's not going to be easy to meet up with the Shoshones now. More than likely this fire was set by Indian scouts to warn their people of strangers in the area." Lewis frowned. "The scouts must have decided we're a war party, so they set a big, noticeable fire to tell their band to keep out of sight." "Captain, if the Shoshones don't let us get near them, what will we do?" Shannon asked. "Without horses, how will we be able to cross the mountains before winter sets in?" Lewis did not answer, and they sat in silence for several minutes. Soon Pomp awoke with a small whimper, and Sacagawea slid his cradleboard off her shoulders. Seaman nuzzled Pomp's cheeks, bringing a smile to the baby's face. Sacagawea began to nurse her baby and sing a quiet, soothing song. As they listened to the song, Seaman edged closer to Lewis. His tail thumped gently, and Lewis's face began to relax. So far, the captain reflected the corpse had found a way to overcome every challenge. They would find a way to cross the Rockies, and if they didn't, well, Lewis, for one, was willing to die trying. A few days later, on July 22nd, Sacagawea sat up and looked carefully at the land beside the river. "I've been here before, when I was a girl," she told Lewis. She spoke quietly, but with conviction. Lewis stared at her. You recognize this place? He asked. Are you sure? Sacagawea smiled. Yes, I know this place, she said confidently. In summer, my people sometimes camped along the banks of the river. Soon we will reach Three Forks, where 3 rivers join together from the Missouri River. Lewis's mind was racing. If Sacagawea's people came here every summer, then surely the Shoshone were somewhere nearby. The explorers ought to be able to find them. Late that afternoon, Seaman began to bark, his tail wagging excitedly. The men steadied the canoe and searched the bank of the river. It was Captain Clark and his scouting party. The boats were pulled close to the shore, and Lewis jumped out, with Seaman splashing beside him. William, we were nearing the headquarters of the Missouri. Or we are nearing, Lewis blurted. Sacagawea recognized this stretch of the river. She says her people camp here in the summer. Have you seen any sights of the... Suddenly, Lewis stopped speaking. Seaman was sniffing Clark's bare feet. They were a bloody mess. What happened to your feet? Lewis cried in alarm. Prickly pear, Clark replied in disgust. That cursed cactus grows so thick around here we couldn't avoid it, and it ripped the soles of our moccasins to shreds. Lewis knelt to examine the soles of Clark's feet. Seemed to also have ripped the soles of your feet to shreds. The overland party had cuts and blisters covering every inch of their feet. Lewis treated the cuts and opened blisters so that they would drain. He insisted the men stay off their feet for a day to let them heal. But the overland party had worse news than prickly feet. They had not succeeded in finding the Shoshones, and without Shoshone horses, the captains had no idea how to get across the mountain. Clark was determined to try again despite his torn feet. Sorry, y'all. And he set out the next day with 3 men. Lewis proceeded up the river with the rest of the corps. River travel became even harder. The current was swifter, and the water was icier, but the sun remained every bit as hot. Walking along the riverbank was just as bad as boat duty. In Lewis's journal, he complained the expedition was bothered by a trio of pests, mosquitoes, eye gnats, and prickly pears. The men became so weary that Lewis tried to encourage them by adding his own muscle to the group's efforts. The captain himself took turns poling one of the canoes. As soon as the travel conditions seemed as bad as they could get, they got worse. The explorers discovered needlegrass, a plant with sharp seeds that poked right through the leather and stuck in their skin. The seeds had to be picked out one by one. Poor Seaman suffered mightily from this new pest. Lewis wrote that his dog was constantly biting and scratching himself as if in a rack of pain. Maybe this river doesn't have an end, York said one evening. He was picking needlegrass seeds out of his legs of his buckskin pants. Maybe it just twists around like a big old knot and we'll go around and around, retracting our own steps. Coulter grinned. It has to have an end, York. Every river has an end. We just haven't found it yet. Seaman gnawed at the back of his legs, trying to pull out needlegrass. Coulter sat down on the ground next to him. Take it easy, Seaman. You're going to chew holes in your skin. Coulter began to pick the seeds out of the dog's fur, and Seaman stretched out on his side, panting. After a few minutes, Coulter gently stroked the dog's fur. That's all I can do, Seaman. It's so dark I can't see the seeds anymore. Maybe this here river does have an end, York continued. But you think we're ever going to find it? Seems to me the days are getting shorter. I used to finish cooking supper before it got dark. Now I can hardly gather the kindling before dark. Coulter stared at the black river. It does get dark sooner every day, York. Winter always comes early in the high country. Captain Clark says that we can't cross the mountains in winter. You reckon we'll make winter camp out here? I don't think there's enough game out here to last all winter, Coulter said. We haven't seen a herd of buffalo in days. If we don't get across the Rocky soon, I think the expedition will have to turn back. The river began to curve toward the southeast, which worried Lewis. That meant that they were traveling in the direction exactly opposite of their goal. The men's spirits sank as low as the river's chilly bottom. Not even Seaman splashing merrily through the water could bring a smile to Lewis's face. Unless their luck changed and changed quickly, the Lewis and Clark expedition seemed to be doomed. On July 27th, the river came to a wide valley. A second river rushed at the men, and a little ways upstream, the third river rushed downstream to join the other waterways. At last, they had reached the spot described by the Indians as at Fort Mandan by Sacagawea, Three Forks. Lewis ordered the men to pull up the canoes to the banks. He whistled for seamen, and they climbed a nearby hill. Below them were two valleys. To the south and the east they could see the two rivers flowing through one of the valleys, and from the southwest there came a third river flowing through the second valley. The waters from all three rivers merged into the Missouri. Lewis sat on the ground and patted his leg for Seaman to sit beside him, and he stroked Seaman's fur. His mood began to lift. The green valleys, stripped with the rivers, lay below them. Around them, snow-capped mountains forged a jagged border against the sky. No other American citizen had seen this beautiful place. Lewis thought the corpse of discovery had come so far. He wanted to preserve this sight, this moment, in his mind. Even if they didn't reach the Pacific Ocean, he told himself the explorers had accomplished so much. The corpse made a camp at Three Forks. That afternoon, Clark and his overland party tramped in wearily. Clark was feeling sick with a fever and muscle aches. Even worse, he reported that his party had not spotted a single Shoshone. The explorers stayed at Three Forks for the next 2 days while Clark recovered. There was plenty to do. The men tanned hides to make clothes and moccasins. Coulter took Seaman out hunting, although there were no buffalo. Deer were plentiful, and Coulter brought back several bucks. York and Charbonneau prepared hearty meals for the tired travelers. As they sat around that evening fire, Cruzat played his fiddle, and Shannon sang silly songs to amuse baby Pomp. Seaman settled down near the baby, rested his head on his front paws, and dozed. When Sacagawea began to speak, Seaman lifted his head and cocked his ears. All of the explorers stopped to listen for Sacagawea accordingly. For Sacagawea ordinarily spoke very little. "This is the place. 5 summers ago when I last saw my family." Her steady voice told a story of the Hadasta raiding party that came upon the Shoshone camp. "We ran for 3 miles and hid ourselves in the woods. But the Hadasta braves chased us. When they found us, they killed our 4 men and 4 of our women, and they killed many of our young boys. Most of us became their prisoners, and they took us far away from this place, far down the Missouri River, the same river that we have just traveled up so many miles. They took us to their village near Fort Mandan." George Shannon looked at Sacagawea's eyes, bright in her firelight. "How old were you when you were taken prisoner?" he asked. "I had seen 12 summers," she said simply. Although her words were heartbreaking, Sacagawea spoke without any display of her feelings. She did not weep or complain. This was her story, and she accepted it as the grass accepts the sun and the sky accepts the thunder. Nobody spoke after a few minutes. Cruzat played a slow, lonely song on his fiddle. When the men of the corps were living at Fort Mandan, the last landmark of the Indians could describe for them the Three Forks. Now the expedition had reached Three Forks. The captains were on their own. Nobody had given them any advice about which way to continue traveling west. They didn't know which of the Three Forks to follow, so they chose the river that curved to the west, since that was the direction of the Pacific Ocean. They named it the Jefferson River in honor of the president. While Clark led the canoes up the river, Lewis led a short scouting parties overland to search for the Shoshone Indians. He left Seaman with the canoes because the Shoshones might be scared off by the sight of such a big dog, but Lewis's luck was no better than Clark's. On August 8th, Sacagawea recognized another landmark, a rise her people called the Beaver's Head. She said this was near a place where the Shoshone lived during the summer months. Now this was encouraging news. Lewis took 2 men and set out to locate the Indians, leaving Seaman with Clark and the others. And y'all, I'm going to stop right here on this paragraph, and I'll see you on the next video.